You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 361 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. And I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's going well, Jeremy. Thanks.
It's a beautiful night in Wrigleyville. It's a beautiful night in the Chicagoland area. And joining us this week to help us unpack the week that was for the Cubs, look ahead to the remainder of the season, talk about all the news, longtime friend of the show. You know him from his fantastic work at CHGO and all of his appearances here covering the Sox and the Cubs, and he's all over the place with baseball. Jared Wyllys, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Yeah, good to be with you guys.
We've got a lot to get to. We've got a lot to talk about. So let's dive in. We'll start with the news of the week. A lot to unpack here. We'll start with Justin Steele's injury. Pat, you and I attended the Pirates game where it was scheduled to be Steele versus Skeens, but the Justin Steele injury resulted in a Kyle Hendricks versus Skeens game.
Neato.
And yeah, Justin Steele he went to the IL with elbow inflammation. There is a chance.
Hendricks did pitch well.
He did 5 innings. Yeah,
he did what he could under the circumstances.
Absolutely, and it was extra frustrating because the Cubs did load the bases twice against Skeens and couldn't
in
score.
The first 2 innings.
Yeah, after the second inning, he was up to 50 pitches. I'm texting you he's going to be gone after this.
There were 100 pitches thrown in that inning before we got to the top of the third. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, so that was a frustrating game. We'll get to the frustrating offense as we continue to talk about the week that was, but let's stick with Justin Steele for a moment. To the IL, he could come back next week. Jared, any updates on the injury for Justin Steele, and do you even think at this point where the Cubs are in the standings that they should bring him back?
Well, yeah, that's kind of the big question is is it even worth it at this point, given especially this homestand that they just had, the playoff hopes that they had built up just enough on their 6-0 road trip, then you turn around and you win 2 games at home all week. So at this point, in my opinion, it's probably not even worth it. However, every update that we got over this past weekend during the Yankees series was that they are still operating as if he's going to return. He was doing some throwing. He's fully on the trying to return from the IL protocol right now. And so that's where they're at, is they're planning on bringing him back. However, I do wonder, give another 3 days of games against the Dodgers in LA, how the offense has scored of late and going up against the best team in the National League. If they win 1 out of 3 or even get swept, we might see things shift a little bit. But for now, at least, all the talk is they expect him to return.
If the Cubs are, say, by a week from Wednesday, with 11 games to go, 2 games or fewer out of the third wild card, maybe I could see bringing him back if he's truly healthy. But anything more than that seems risky to me, especially given the fact that 2 games is really 3 games, 3 games is really 4 games, because the Cubs have the tiebreaker against no one, right? So you just add a game to that in your head, however far they are out, they have to win by 1 more than that team. It seems like just to get 2, maybe 3 starts out of Steele down the stretch would be pretty risky. An elbow, I don't know. You said they're operating under the assumption that he's going to play. I don't want them operating on him at all. So I would kind of like
right.
to give him some
We're
rest.
trying to avoid.
Yeah.
Because that's you have to think long term as well, of course. And I'm sure the conversations within the organization have a lot to do with, he's a competitor who wants to come back, I'm sure, and wants to pitch again this season. And I can imagine from his perspective, it's hard to accept, like, okay, you're done. But from the organization's perspective, we can't risk, Pat, you're exactly right, like setting you up for something worse down the road by trying to force a return now in September for a season that really you're not really going anywhere this fall regardless. So in my opinion, I think this ends with him getting shut down. It's just a matter of, it probably doesn't officially happen for another 4 days or something like that.
I would hate to see a repeat of spring training 1999 when Kerry Wood came to camp and discovered that he was going to miss the whole season with an arm injury that, was probably due to some overuse during the pennant race the year before, when the Cubs won the wild card game. And back then, there's only one wild card. So it wasn't even as if you were one of 6 teams in the playoffs. You were at least one of 4. And then we got spanked by the Braves. So I don't know. I learned my lesson.
And Justin Steele is coming off of a career year in innings pitched last year, right? So some extra time off going into next season probably would be useful. The other Cubs pitching news of the week was the combined no-hitter that we saw. Imanaga pitched tremendous. Pearson and Hodge shut it down. This was the first no-hitter by the Cubs at Wrigley Field since Milt Pappas in 1972, Pat.
Yes. Brings back memories of the season ticket holder day, I think 13 years ago, when I was at Wrigley Field and got to ask Milt Pappas to take a picture with me, and he ended up explaining to my wife and 1-year-old about how he got screwed out of a perfect game and only got a no-hitter because the umpire made a terrible mistake, miscarriage of justice. So I thought of that, and my goal had always been that if a Cub pitcher were to ever pitch a no-hitter at home, I would go there. In fact, remember those years when, if it was even close, I would head down to the stadium, and my goal was always to rush in the 8th inning or whatever. I had gone to the game as you did on Tuesday night. So here it is Wednesday, and I'd gotten home with my family. I'm watching the game, and I'm thinking maybe I should go down there. And I decided against it. 1, because I'm old now, and 2, because I got to be honest, like the combined no-hitter, while satisfying to the extent that it's still a no-hitter, I'm glad for the team. After we had the combined no-hitter in Los Angeles back in 2021, didn't quite feel the same as like the Alec Mills one against Kansas City, or some of the Zambranos or the Arrietas. I remember those games. It just, and I don't mean to, in no way do I mean to disparage anybody. I mean, it was a great job by Pearson and Hodge, right, out of the bullpen. But it feels like an accomplishment, but not as high an accomplishment to me. I don't know.
Well, because isn't part of the allure has always been that it is this, like, it's kind of a singular effort without truly being a singular effort, because we all know that a no-hitter involves some good defensive plays, and it's still a team effort no matter what. But there's something about one guy who takes the mound in the 1st inning and is still there for the last out in the 9th inning. And even more so these days with the way that baseball handles starting pitching, to get a guy into the 9th inning at all just is such a rare thing. So to then have somebody who is able to complete that feat themselves all the way through, to me, is even more special than it used to be. And so I had a similar reaction, like, seeing the end of that game Wednesday night. I thought, okay, this is cool, but is it something that I think of as being noteworthy? Like, I've kind of already forgotten about the one in 2021, because there isn't like that one guy who you can say this was Jake Arrieta's no-hitter.
Can you name the pitchers, the 4 or 5 pitchers from that one? I can't.
No. Sorry. I couldn't. Like, I think Craig Kimbrell finished it, right?
Which and it was still a no-hitter. He probably walked the bases loaded for all we know. I can't remember,
right,
but yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you who pitched that game for the Cubs. So,
but you can remember the 2 Arrietas and 2 Zambranos.
Right, sure.
Right, those are.
those I remember vividly. Yeah. But yeah, ask me in 3 years
or Mills,
who pitched in this game on Wednesday night. I probably will remember that Shota started it, but if you're like, who are the other pitchers? There's a decent chance I won't be able to tell you.
Were you surprised, Jared, that Imanaga came out when he did of that game? Would you?
It's yeah. I mean, my feeling is always like, I think we baby the pitchers a little bit too much, because if all of this limiting innings and pitch counts was really making a difference, it's hard to square that against the number of injuries that we still see with pitchers. And I know there's a lot to it, beyond just those factors. So there's that part of it where it's like, yeah, I know he's at 95 pitches. And it might take him 30 more to finish the game, or even more than that. But with something like that is in the works, that you get that deep into the game, I'm still like, you've got to give the guy a shot. But maybe that's because I'm just old enough that I still, get a little grumpy old man about pitch counts. But that being said, like, again, kind of like the Justin Steele conversation, are you a pitcher in his first year in the United States under an innings load that's probably higher than he's, I haven't really looked back on some of his innings counts in Japan, but like, there's also that part of it too, where it's like, is it worth it at this stage in the season to potentially put 130 pitches on his arm? I guess I can see the thinking, but I still don't like it.
I look at it as, I guess similarly to you, like, you could probably convince me if it were, say, Cade Horton as a rookie or Paul Skeens to go easy on it. This dude's 30 years old. Like, he's thrown 100 pitches before. He's done it this year. Like, I'm a little bit in the give me a break category. And look, the Cubs were going to win the game regardless. So it wasn't about that. They had a 12-run lead, right? So even if my thought was this, look, you may not want to throw him 140 pitches. I get that. But let him start the 8th. And, the Pirates are dumb. Like, maybe they'll swing at the first 3 pitches. And next thing you know, you'll be in the 9th inning and you'll be at 99 pitches. Then go for it, right? And if you give up a hit, take him out. That's fine. But at least give him the chance to try to do it. What's the real harm in that? And even if he labors through the 8th inning and gets through it, maybe you take him out in the 9th then. But I just felt like it was premature to take him out in the 8th before you kind of really knew, like, whether he was getting close to whether he could actually pull it off or not in the 9th. And I don't want to get the guy hurt. And if he said to counsel, hey, I'm out of gas, I don't have anything left, my arm might fall off, my elbow's sore, that'd be one thing. It doesn't seem like that was the case, but I would have let it play out a little bit longer in the 8th inning, I guess, is my take. I know some people have said, well, if he's not going to pitch 9, why bother at all? But baseball's such a weird sport. And like I said, the Pirates hitters are really bad. So pop up, ground out, fly out on 3 or 4 or 5 pitches, and maybe you're in business still. I would have liked to see him try. Other people said that as a result of the Cubs being in the pennant race, I guess they're in a pennant race, that that they wanted to keep him rested. I don't know about that either. For the fans who have endured this season, I feel like it was worth letting him, try it. And for what he's accomplished this year.
And for what it's worth, when we talked to Craig Counsell on Friday before Friday's game, he talked a little bit about the decision-making process, and it wasn't at all that Shota was tired or feeling anything like that. That wasn't necessarily a factor. So, and there's some off days built in over the next couple of weeks, so they'll keeping him rested for, I don't know. So yeah,
including the day after.
Right. The very next day is an off day. But yeah, I agree. I think at the very least, you put him out there for the 8th inning, have somebody ready so that if they do get a hit, then you can pull him right away. But you're right. Like,
if he throws 20 more pitches, then take him out. Like, don't kill him. But
and if he's sitting at 115 pitches going into the 9th, nobody's going to fuss at you for pulling him at that point.
Right.
But when it's still under 100 and he's 6 outs away, at least give him one more inning and just see what happens.
We talked about the pennant race, and going into that Pirate series, the tone was very different than it was after dropping 2 of 3 at home to Pittsburgh. Really disappointing. The getting shut out on the Tuesday game, foreshadowing what would come as the weekend series against the New York Yankees unfolded. You really wanted to see the Cubs take 2 out of 3 at minimum, knowing that the Yankees were coming to town. Jared, I know you were at these games this weekend. The highlight for me as a fan was the Friday game, the anticipation of the return of Anthony Rizzo to Wrigley Field for the first time since the 2021 trade. This was we've seen guys return. We saw Baez last month and the great video they did, the great reception from the fans, and I had really high expectations for what was going to happen when Rizzo came to town, and they met or exceeded my expectations. And playing his walk-up music when he came up, the ovation from the fans, the video package. Jared, tell us what it was like being in the building.
Yeah, I mean, it really that's one thing that the Cubs as an organization, I think, do particularly well, or have done
a lot of practice.
Yeah, but by the time it's Anthony Rizzo, they've done this a few times. But I think the way that the 2016 group in particular, because we know that this is just always going to be such a special team. That as the years go on, whenever they do come back and eventually when they retire, and that's always going to be above and beyond anything else. But with Rizzo, the icing on the cake for me was when they played his walk-up song when he came up to bat, because we didn't know that was going to happen. That wasn't something that was was publicly known was going to be a part of it. The video was fantastic, and the way that and this may have been partially, the Yankees, but the way that Rizzo was positioned in the dugout while the video was playing, he was by himself, kind of there on the railing. All the other Yankees teammates all kind of moved down to give him some space. And it really felt like, hey, we're giving you this moment. And then he came out of the field and tipped his cap and all that. It was pretty great. And I think something that he definitely deserved, because we spoke to Rizzo beforehand, talked to Jed Hoyer beforehand about the what led up to that trade is probably not the best situation. Jed Hoyer even said, hey, in hindsight, I don't think I handled that as well as I should have, because he said it was personal, because he's like, I've known Rizzo since he was 17 years old. I was part of the Boston organization when he was there, brought him to San Diego, then brought him to Chicago. And his words were, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he said, the agent buffer is there for a reason. And he said, sometimes we went around that buffer. And that was as specific as he got about that. But I think that's pretty telling that he now can look at it and say, yeah, I probably bungled that one. And it's too bad, because when Rizzo was asked about could you ever come back to the Cubs? Would you ever do that? And his words were, I want to retire a Yankee. So, and of course he did go on to say, but you never know the future. You never know what's going to happen. But he said, I want to retire a Yankee. And I think they honored him really nicely. I'm glad they did that, but it's hard to also, you can't ignore the circumstances that led to this happening in the first place.
So what you're saying, from what I can tell, is that Jed Hoyer is the Jerry Krause of Chicago baseball.
At least in this deal, it's maybe because it's you can't ignore it when the man himself says, "Yeah, I kind of bungled this one."
Well, I will say this about the Rizzo return. First, I take full credit for coming up with the idea of having the Yankees bat 6 batters in the first inning so that Rizzo could start come up first in the second inning. I think that helped a lot because it allowed extra time with the stupid pitch clock and all that other stuff.
Right.
For you notice because he was up first, they were able to avoid starting all the nonsense. And we've seen when players have come back before with the Cubs and elsewhere, where sometimes depending on the umpire, they just become sticklers, and the team's either forced to take a ball like the pitcher, or it's just stupid stuff, right? So they were able to kind of sidestep all of that, which was good because that meant that we were able to see, the whole celebration and Rizzo, et cetera. And, I think it's probably good for the rest of the people in that Yankees dugout to see because, I mean, none of them have ever come close to winning a World Series. So they can actually see what winning is like and see a real winner like an Anthony Rizzo. So in that regard, I thought it was well done. It was touching for those of us who are big Rizzo fans and didn't want to necessarily get rid of him when they did. So yeah, I thought all in all it went quite well, and it's just it just makes I think it for some of us, myself included, it kind of brought up some feelings of was it all worth it? The whole the trade of I mean, look, I get it. Like they couldn't keep all these guys, but the trade of basically every player on that team they could get rid of, so they could quote retool. 3.5 years later, here we are. Really, 4 years later from when they cut Kyle Schwarber and traded Yu Darvish for Children. So and yeah, it's nice to see PCA, who they were able to acquire in the Baez deal, but I think what we're going to be able to say in a more definitively in 2 or 3 years is that, for all you hear about how they traded the core to build up the farm system, they didn't really build up the farm system much with these trades. They got a couple guys, maybe 2 guys that'll ever play in the majors, 3 tops. So it wasn't like some major overhaul where, I mean, just the way they did it, they waited too long if they were going to trade people until 2 months left in the season. And, I just think the whole thing, and then they half-assed it by getting rid of half the guys before the season, and then they were in first place, and then they're like, what do we do? And then they're like, oh, thank God we lost 14 in a row or whatever, so we can trade everybody else. It just brings back a lot of those bad memories and bad taste to the mouth of people. It's not the principle. It's not the understanding of, oh, you should have resigned everybody. That's not the point. The point is, from a baseball perspective, how much better off are they now? And the answer is not much.
Yeah, it's been disappointing to see where they are now, Jared. After watching same thing, I was watching those videos and I'm like, yeah, you got rid of your captain, you got rid of your most exciting player in Baez and a former MVP, and what do you have to show for it this many years later?
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, especially in Rizzo's case, because I feel like, no, of course you weren't going to keep all those guys. And in hindsight, looking at what's happened with Baez and Bryant in particular since then, you can justify at least like, all right, they wouldn't be in good shape if those guys were still on the roster. Are they in better shape now with what they do have instead? I think that's very debatable.
Probably could have kept Kyle Schwarber for an extra year since his contract was not up, and they desperately needed that.
That would have been nice.
That's egregious.
Yeah, absolutely. But in Rizzo's case, like, I think I understand the pure business side of baseball and all of that, but like, you have a guy who was there from the 100-loss 2012 season, like some horrible years, 2012, 2013, 2014 wasn't really all that much better. Like, rode out those seasons. He was the guy trying to beat up the whole Reds dugout 10 years ago.
Successfully.
And he was, he was that guy for you, and then was there, fittingly caught the last out of the World Series. Like, there's something to be said for that. And would it be the worst thing in the world if you made a stronger effort to keep him around for longer, so that maybe he's talking about retiring as a Chicago Cub, or at least spending more of his years in Chicago? Because I think if that happens, you might, when you're in the conversation of like, who are your best Cubs of all time? What's your Mount Rushmore of Chicago Cubs? You might have to at least consider Anthony Rizzo. But I don't know that that's the case given how things have unfolded. It's hard to say. But I look back on 2021 as one of the just most unfortunate seasons the Cubs have had in quite a while for a variety of reasons, but that has a lot to do with it to me.
Based on how the market ended up playing out, the Cubs not traded Rizzo, they very likely could have gotten him back on a 3-year deal. Would he sign a 2-year deal with the Yankees after the season ended?
Yeah.
And then this would be his final year, right? Given what's happened the last 3 years, I could live with that. The Frank Schwindel era would be, I'd be happy to have him as the DH or somewhere else. I mean, it just, it seems like it's something they could have absorbed. And at least for the last couple of years when the Cubs were really bad, it would have been somebody that you could kind of have around that, was some sort of link to the glory days.
He's a link to the glory days. He's a great guy off the field as well. All the charitable work he did around the city of Chicago was just, he's absolutely someone who should be part of the Cubs Hall of Fame eventually. And we saw this weekend 2 other players, Kerry Wood and Aramis Ramirez, get inducted into the Cubs Hall of Fame. Both of these players are super fun to watch when in their days. I'll never forget the day that Aramis Ramirez was traded from Pittsburgh to the Cubs.
I was at the Sheffield Garden Walk, and I was in the dining room of somebody's house going to use their restroom. I saw it on my little crappy like flip phone or whatever, and I'm like, oh my God, the Cubs got Aramis Ramirez and Kenny Lofton. This is awesome.
It was amazing. Like, that was everything that they needed. I mean, what a whole third base was for so long until Aramis Ramirez got to town. Just great to see them again. Again, the Cubs doing a great job with the video packages and the tributes. Jared, your thoughts on the induction ceremony for Wood and Ramirez?
Yeah, I mean, two incredibly deserving guys. When I think back to, the last 20, 25 years of Cubs baseball, 2 guys that made them worth watching, both in seasons when they were good and then some seasons when they weren't so good. You still felt like you had something to watch for. Kerry Wood, to see like where he went from as a rookie to kind of all the injury trouble that he dealt with, but then, came back and was found a different way to be productive for that team. And then Aramis Ramirez was like, I think it was 2008, that comeback against the Brewers and that home run that Aramis Ramirez hit. I was in my car, like driving home, and I was at a stoplight, and like he hits the homer, and I'm just shouting in my car. And then I hear similar shouting in the car next to me, and it's a guy listening to the Cubs game. And we have, we kind of shared this moment. We like air high-fived each other. And it, it's such a goofy thing, but I'm like, that's something that's like permanently ingrained in my baseball memory now. And it was all thanks to Aramis Ramirez. So,
and Jeremy, at that same moment in time, I was moving into my condo.
I remember
two blocks away, up high, and had the radio on in the living room on the boombox because the TV cable wasn't hooked up yet. But the doors were open. It was a beautiful day. It was like July 31st or something. It was the end of July, I think. And so I was in the back bedroom setting something up, and I can hear, even from that side, which faces north, this eruption from the crowd. And I race all the way through the place to the front to hear the radio finally pick up the fact, because there's a delay. So I hear on the radio in the same time that Jared was hearing it, although I already could tell from looking out the window at the crowd jumping up and down that something had happened, that Ramirez had hit the home run. And I'm like, this is great. I'm going to love this place. Little did I know we'd win a World Series while I lived there. But those are the types of memories that you have from these guys. I can remember the Kerry Wood 20 strikeout game. I was living in New York at the time, and I was listening to, I used to listen to The Fan in the afternoons at work, WFAN. Good baseball people that they were. They broke into their broadcast and simulcasted the WGN 8th and 9th innings of Wood pitching, because they even understood, as sports radio people, what a historic event this was. And so I got to listen to my own home team announcers announcing the 20 strikeout game while on New York radio, which I thought was really cool of both the radio station, but also just to show you how important that event was. So many positive things. I think it was the 2008. Do you remember the clincher against the Cardinals? The late September, it was at Wrigley Field, and Wood was the closer. And he came in and closed out the game. And my now wife, then girlfriend, was prominently featured standing on her chair, like nervous, biting her fingernails. And for whatever reason, the cameraman seemed to find that interesting and zoomed in on her for quite a long time, because we were getting lots of text messages about that. Just those types of moments are that's kind of defines your Cub fandom, like it's not even all about winning the World Series. It's about the players that you kind of go through all these struggles with and that you have these memories of. And that's what brings people to the ballpark. And I hope that the management and the ownership and the general management of the team fully appreciates that when they make some of these decisions, like they did with the Rizzo situation.
Nowadays, we're all, since the early 20 teens, right? We've all been paying attention to prospects and the building of the farm system and all of that. But Kerry Wood, for a lot of us, was the first prospect that we heard about, and that we were all anticipating his debut, and then he makes his debut and has what was an incredible rookie season. That was, really one of my first times following a prospect through to the major leagues.
That's back when, you'd have to pick up the Baseball America magazines and go through and look at what these guys had done. I remember going to bookstores and just
I would go to the Barnes and Noble on Diversity to get to see the Cubs prospects. And by the way, that store now reopened a couple months ago after being shuttered for 12 years or something, 15 years.
Oh, that's amazing. I love hearing that. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's like at Clark and Diversity. Check it out if you're ever near the park again. I used to go there and look at all the Cubs prospects when they had all these top 100 prospects. Now, I also remember the Brownlees and and all the Haggertys, Luke Haggerty, and all these other guys that we never quite saw at the major league level or anywhere close. But it was really the one source of prospects back then were the magazines where you would look and say, oh, the Cubs have this guy or this guy.
How else would I follow Josh Vitters?
Right.
As closely as I did.
So a lot of festivities this weekend. Unfortunately, all of the news was off the field, because on the field, the offensive struggles continued as the Cubs were shut out 3 times this week, twice this weekend against the Yankees, losing 3-0 on the Friday game.
Have the Cubs ever been shut out 3 times in a 4-game period, at least in modern history? Even the bad Cubs teams didn't do that.
It's hard to imagine, and especially at home during good weather too. I mean, it was a little chilly over the weekend, but this wasn't it wasn't April, so.
It was 70.
Not what you expect to see at all. Yeah, it was pretty nice there. But funnily enough, that was a topic of conversation both Friday and Saturday, and talking to Jed Hoyer and Craig Counsell. And some of that, to be fair to them, is because we ask about it. But Jed Hoyer mentioned that, his perception is that it's been worse for their offense weather-wise in 2024 than it was in 2023. And
we did telling you the pitching's overrated. Our pitching's overrated then, because
that's the flip side of that coin, right? But somebody, we did look it up, and according to ballpark factors, that is technically true. And I'm not smart enough to know what all goes into ballpark factors as far as that's concerned. But yeah, they talked a little bit about that. Very careful to say it's not an excuse. To which I feel like it's not as if this is new. Cubs teams have been dealing with this for decades upon decades now. And the wind or the lack of wind doesn't keep you from stringing hits together. It might knock down a home run or two, but when I think it was Saturday in particular, they never got 2 hits in a row. So the wind's not keeping you from doing that. So say what you will about the weather, but
this team is uniquely qualified to not hit home runs because they haven't done it all year, home or a road. So really that shouldn't be, I mean, this is a team of built for warning track power. So really the wind shouldn't be much of a factor, frankly, whatsoever in the run scoring output. But as much as they don't want to use it as an excuse, it sounds kind of like they were. I can remember when we were told that the Cubs' problem was that their hitters were all too similar, so they had to get rid of hitters and replace them with new hitters. I assume they've now done that, and it's still not working. I guess what I would say in relation both to your point, Jeremy, earlier about the retool and where we are, and also, Jared, about the offense right now is when I see quotes like, well, the good news is, after 2026, headed into 2027, Suzuki and Happ and Horner will be off the books, so that'll clear some space. I'm like, wait a minute, timeout. First off, Happ and Suzuki are our best players right now. Not that they're the best players in the league, but the best players on this team offensively. But I'm not willing to wait until 2027 to begin trying to put another team together. That's not what we were told in 2021. This isn't a decade-long project, right? Like something's got to give here.
Well, and two, we've how many times have we been down this kind of a road? Like Pat, like you just alluded to, this constant conversation about, well, we need this type of hitter or that type of hitter. To me, like there are really good hitters in baseball who do what they do regardless of ballpark factors and where they play and all that. A guy like Aaron Judge, no one is ever talking about where he plays his home games and what the weather factors are. Like if you're a good hitter, you're a good hitter. It just simply doesn't matter. And I think they try too hard to, I don't know. There's a lot of like reading a whole lot into some of that kind of stuff. And I think it's sometimes it's simpler than it's made out to be. And you're right.
Sounds like the perfect hitter for them, Jared, would be Juan Soto, because it doesn't matter where the wind's blowing. He can walk 4 times a game.
And if only he was soon to be available, but
yes, right.
But alas.
Yeah, the Cubs did score 2 runs winning the Sunday game. The 2 runs coming, Isaac Paredes hit a shot that probably would have been caught by if your center fielder wasn't Aaron Judge.
Isn't it wild to you that Aaron Judge plays center field? It is to me. Like,
it is, yeah.
He is a tailor-made left fielder / DH when you see him, just physically when you see him, right? Like,
right. He's a giant. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the Dave Kingman of old. Like, you don't put those guys, Elton Howard, you put them at first base, maybe center field. That's just, that amuses me.
No, and I watched that ball drop in there, and I said, well, that's what you get when you put him in center field. Plays like that. So as we look at, we'll put a bow on the offense here.
One last thing about the offense. Pete Crow Armstrong, let me give you a quick breakdown.
Sure.
Here.
We've been talking a lot about, we've been watching Amaya and PCA as they heated up, and we were watching to see how the rest of this goes. And where are we right now with PCA?
So Jared, a couple weeks ago, we had Matt Trueblood on the show, and he's a little bit more cynical than we are, although not terribly more. And he set out a warning that although PCA was on a heater and was, hitting very well, he acknowledged. He said that was going to come to an end and he was going to go into a big slump because what he's doing was not sustainable in terms of his ability to swing at everything and still hit 350 or whatever he'd been hitting for the previous month. So I did what we Gen Xers call, I wrote stuff down on a yellow legal pad. So I tracked all the games last week, and I'm not one of these internet guys who just starts with the game that makes my side look better. I hate that stuff, in the last 12 games and 4 innings, this guy's done this. It's like, no, I just started on Monday and I went through the week. So it's the 6th game homestand, right? So I'm just going to run through the final results here with you. I won't go pitch by pitch and game by game. So PCA, and I wanted to see, like, for myself, like what were the outcomes were of the at bat. So PCA went 4 for 19. Okay, that's almost 1 for 4. He struck out 11 times though, and had 1 homer and a double. So he saw 78 pitches, which is a little bit high for him. It was 3.9 per at bat, which is actually high for him. But I think because he struck out so much, he saw more pitches because it takes at least 3 pitches to strike out. He swung at 68% of the pitches, which would make Javier Baez blush a little bit. And he missed 48% of all the pitches that were thrown to home plate. Swung and missed. So, I get it, right? Like, Matt's not completely wrong. In the one game where he went 3 for 4, he did it on, he got a double on the third pitch, a homer on the second pitch, a single on the fourth pitch. And then when he got his one other single that week, it was on the first pitch. And I get the idea that some players are first pitch hitters. I don't mind that. I think that's admirable in a lot of ways if that works for you. But I did a little bit of digging, and apparently, and this is not a Gen X thing, it's probably a Gen Z thing. They keep track of all the things I was writing down by computer, and you can go and look at the season numbers. So I looked at the season numbers for PCA, and as it turns out, the week was not an aberration per se for him. This is kind of like where he's been. He strikes out, although for the full season, only strikes out 24% of the time. He walks, 5%. I looked at his first pitch swinging, and so he swings at the first pitch of an at bat 49% of the time, which is almost half. Second highest Cub to do that is Dansby Swanson at 36%, significantly lower. And then, other guys are like Horner's in the 20s and Happ's 32 and Suzuki's 14%, of course, like he doesn't swing at the first pitch ever. But, Bush is at 30%. So there's a difference. And I wonder, and I haven't done any more research because I was running out of time because I spent all that time handwriting that other stuff. But has a player ever swung at 49% of the first pitches thrown to them and been successful over the course of a season? I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to look at, like, I don't know, Vlad Guerrero Sr. or something, maybe. I'm just trying to think of who that might be. But I do know this. If you swing at 68% of all the pitches thrown to home plate, pitchers are going to start figuring that out, and they're not going to throw strikes, I think, at some point. And this week was kind of an example of that with the 11 strikeouts. And a lot of those were 3-pitch strikeouts where he swung at all 3 pitches. So I think he's made a lot of progress in terms of when he hits the ball. And make no mistake, he was 4 for 8 on balls put in play. He hit 500. So when he puts the ball in play, he does quite well. But I think it is a little bit unsustainable if you don't put more balls in play to put up acceptable numbers offensively. So I guess that's something I'm sure they're aware of it. Obviously, it's something they have to work on. And, from an approach standpoint, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or if you've talked to anybody, in the organization about that and about their concerns.
Yeah, that was actually something that Jed talked about a little bit on Friday. Because it came up in the Anthony Rizzo conversation, because he used Rizzo as an example, and he talked about Rizzo as a rookie, as a young player, and the need for Rizzo to shorten up his swing, because he said he came up and he had this big, long swing, and then it was something he had to go into the off season and work on and change that swing to shorten it up a little bit, so that eventually he became, the Rizzo that we see now, who can really like shorten up that swing sometimes, especially with 2 strikes. And
Rizzo can change a game by taking 8 or 9 pitches in an at bat,
right?
10 pitches in an at bat, and sometimes twice in a game. What a difference that makes in terms of getting a pitcher out, like a Skeens, out of the game an inning or 2 early.
Absolutely. And so he talked about one of their goals for PCA during the offseason is to follow a similar path. So there's definitely there's work that's going to be done in the off season on that, and I think it's shortening the swing a little bit, but also working with him on like pitch selection and shrinking that zone of what he's going to swing at, so that he's not swinging at as many pitches as he does. Because I think many of us you can envision him as a potential leadoff hitter given his speed and what he's able to do on the base paths when he does get on. But that's never going to work when he strikes out as much as he does, or at least has short at bats like he does. Because the last thing you want is your leadoff hitter going up there, swinging at 3 pitches and walking back to the dugout. That doesn't
and walking 5% of the time. He hasn't had a walk in September.
Right. So there's a lot of work there. He's shown some progress at the plate from what he looked like last September, but there's still we've got some good results lately, but it's kind of papering over what is a bigger issue. And I think, Matt's right in a lot of ways. Like, this is not sustainable. So he's got
generating more power, which is nice, right? And some of that is speed power, right? Like, he gets a double because he runs really hard, or a triple would have been a double, or in one case an inside the park home run that would have been a triple. But he is hitting the ball harder when he does successfully. But yeah, I really am nervous about that, because I think the Cubs have kind of boxed themselves in where they really do need him to emerge. I know a lot of people are talking about him as a 6-WAR player, and I know there's a lot of hype. I don't want people to get too far ahead of themselves, but the Cubs really do need him to be able to figure that out, because I think without that, their offense is going to struggle again next year, because they're hemmed in on a lot of the other positions in terms of who's going to be there and who's not.
The struggling offense leading to a 2-4 week really did a number on the Cubs' wildcard hopes. As the time of this recording, prior to the Los Angeles Dodgers series, the Cubs are 73-70, 5 games out of the final wildcard spot, behind 2 other teams. The Atlanta Braves and New York Mets both are tied right now for that final wildcard spot. The Cubs 5 games behind. The Cubs went 6-4 in their last 10 games. The Mets 9-1, and Atlanta 5-5.
So that means if the Cubs go 15-4 the rest of the way, and the other teams go 8-11, 9-10, the Cubs will, the Cubs will be in the playoffs. Good news.
Doesn't look good. So, so let's take a look. And now playing 3 games in Los Angeles before 3 in Colorado. Jared, we'll throw it to you real quick for your prediction for the week. 3 in LA, 3 in Colorado.
Unfortunately, I think we're in store for probably another 2-4 week. I don't have high hopes for this LA series. I think, Colorado might be where they pick up the 2 wins. It's the trajectory is not good. They might hit a little better in LA with, but I don't have high hopes right now. The timing of, particularly that Pirates series, to drop 2 of those games, that was really bad timing. So I have 2-4.
Pat?
Ever the optimist, like I was last week, I will say 3-3. And it would have been optimistic last week, unfortunately. But I think the Cubs will take 2 out of 3 in Colorado and 1 out of 3 in LA. And I think if they can pick up 1 game in the standings and be only 4 back going into the last couple weeks, they'll still cling to an outside chance of hope.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see how it goes going into next week. I am also on the 2-4 week. I need to see something to change my mind. Jared, thanks again for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight. Always a pleasure catching up with you and having you on the show. Please remind our listeners where they can find all your work on the internet and follow you on X.
Yeah, 2 places that I'd love people to check out. First is allchgo.com. That's CHGO Sports. That's where you see all of the writing that I do, my occasional podcast appearance there. And then, of course, I'd love it if you subscribe to my newsletter. That's on Substack. It's called The Dugout. I'm sure if you search my name on Substack, you'll find it. And then on X, I'm just Jay Wyllys.
Excellent. Always a great time. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
All right, Pat. Let's close it out as we always do. Parachuting into 1984 to check out what's going on with the 1984 Cubs as we celebrate the 40th anniversary of this team.
Back to 1984. Back in the 1980s and up until probably just the last 10 years or so, sometimes a team would play 2 games, a Monday, Tuesday, and then another team would come into town Wednesday and Thursday, and then another team would come in town for the weekend. That's what happened in 1984. The Cubs swept the Phillies, because we had half their players by now, 2 games to none, split 2 games with Montreal. This is again in Chicago, and then won 1 out of 3 from the Mets, which was a little bit underwhelming, but still ended up being a 4-3 week and left the Cubs 6 games up. Boy, 6 games seems like a lot, doesn't it?
It did.
Sure does when you're trailing.
Yeah, and especially when they were battling the Mets for when they were within a game there.
I know. So, yeah, the Mets really needed a sweep. They didn't get it. Cubs were in good shape. Now, one other thing I would note, too, is Rick Sutcliffe pitched 2 of these games, September 3rd and 8th. The Cubs won both games. He increased his record to 14-1 on the season with the Cubs after coming over from Cleveland. In the first game, he only pitched 8 innings, gave up 3 hits and a walk, struck out 15, though.
Jeez.
In the second game, he did pitch all 9 innings, gave up 4 hits, no walks, no runs, and struck out 12. So a 4-hit, 12K shutout with no walks seems pretty fair. And that was over the Mets, which was a big win. He always came up with the clutch wins, So again, I was telling you about how the Mets series, they won 1 out of 3 and they really needed to win at least 1 and the Mets needed to sweep. He was the stopper. There's a term we used to use called ace. He was an ace.
Yes.
Right. He's the guy who, when the Mets come to town, okay, well, he's going to single-handedly take the mound, not give up the ball to anybody, and win the game by not giving up any runs and striking out half their batters. And he did. So that was very helpful. On the season, he pitched 9 innings 10 times.
Good God.
And pitched 8 or more, meaning either the 8th or got into the 9th, and then Lee Smith or somebody came in 7 more times. So 17 times that he started games, you knew you were going to get at least 8 innings out of him. Can you imagine being a manager now knowing that you're going to get at least 8 innings out of your starter 17 times over the course of a season? It would revolutionize how you could use your bullpen because they'd be so rested from not having to pitch those days.
And a guy like that being available for you to add to your team.
Yeah, it only cost him near Hall of Famer Joe Carter, but they got him. So hey, it takes something. You give something to get something, right? But yeah, he was exactly what they needed that season. He was the ace, and he came through, and the Cubs are rolling.
Always a great time checking in on those 84 Cubs, doing significantly better than our 2024 Cubs at the moment. And with that, we are up against it. We're going to call it a podcast. Time flies when we're talking to Jared Wyllys, and we're having a great time. Make sure you follow us on all the social media platforms at Wrigleyville Nat. You can also support the show via our Patreon, patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. That's where we've been able to keep this show ad-free because of our patrons supporting the show there. So appreciate everyone's support. And we've got our merch. Don't forget there's a whole bunch of sales going on here at the T Public shop as the season's over. So make sure you support the show by buying some merch, mugs, hats, T-shirts, all that stuff. The link is available. It's pinned to our X. It's in the link tree at our Instagram, and you can find it at the store tab on the website, wrigleyvillenation.com.
If you said the link is pinned to our X in 1984, no one would know what you're talking about.
No, we'd be censored for this type of talk. And
this show would be on like CBS or something.
So make sure that you continue to stay subscribed. We've got a few more weeks left in this season. Make sure that you take the time to go over to YouTube, youtube.com/Wrigleyville Nation. That's where we have the video version of this podcast. You can see Pat's yellow pad where he was taking notes. You can see all the stuff over there, the video version of the podcast at our YouTube channel. Give us a subscribe over there, even if you don't consume the podcast through the video form. That helps us work the algorithm so other Cub fans can find the show. So we really appreciate that. And leave us comments and also rate, review, and leave comments on the audio versions. We always appreciate the iTunes store and Google comments and Spotify comments. So with that, now we're going to wrap it up. We're going to call it a podcast. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. And we'll talk to you again next time.